Stitching together the past and the present is key to understanding how we can best shape the education system for future students. And no one better understands this than John Fensterwald, a longtime educational journalist and the editor for EdSource. John's reporting has become a required reading for me before board meetings and just about everyone trying to keep up with our ever-changing education system. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be back at the Summer Academy. Last year, an artist at EdSource and I created a PowerPoint on the landmark education policy changes that affected the students in the class of 2020. Everything I said then still applies, but wow, what a year it's been since then. So I thought it was time to update it. You know, every generation thinks it's special. Being a baby boomer, I can certainly attest to that. We abandoned Copernicus and said that the sun, the moon, and Aquarius revolved around us. Generation Z in California is distinct in a lot of ways. I wish we could discuss it more today, but at least in one way, which is the education shifts or gyrations that your elders forced on you. Some of the changes actually have been good, if not promising. Schools are more equitably funded today than they were when you were in kindergarten. There are more interesting courses, ethnic studies, and dual enrollment is increased, AP courses, and so. But some of the changes, actually, some of the policies affecting you, I'd say, were flawed, if not harmful. And so let's explore this further in an updated PowerPoint.
I think of you as the guinea pigs of change. So for the next 15 minutes, imagine yourself as Ginny the Guinea and join me on a tour of your school life. I'm subtitling it, How Two Recessions, Epic Policy Battles, Landmark Laws, Incomplete Reforms, a Pandemic, and now a post-pandemic flood of funding have shaped your education, baffled your parents, and now create an extraordinary possibility. You may want to pay attention to the slides with the star, perhaps maybe take a screenshot for reference. I'll also provide all the slides to Ed100. So maybe you were born under a bad sign. You went to kindergarten or preschool at the start of the Great Recession. There were no GoFundMe drives back then. Instead, Ginny and her friends asked for donations of kibble for their snacks. How bad was it? Consider Proposition 98, the formula that California uses to determine the portion of state revenue that goes to K-12 schools and community colleges. It fell 13% the year before you started school. There are always opportunities in crisis. Stanford professor Michael Kurst looked at the disaster and said, we can fund schools better and fairer. Around 2008, he co-authored a study that was to shake things up. The idea seemed radical then, to create an equitable way to distribute money and give districts more control over how to spend it. The study didn't get much attention or traction at the time. It would take some years and a new governor before it became what we have today. Ginny heard the term resource allocation, though, and assumed it had something to do with seconds on dessert. Before we go further, let me pause for a moment and talk about the federal No Child Left Behind law that terrorized many of your elementary school teachers, because you can't understand where we are today unless you understand how we got here. A bipartisan Congress passed it in 2002 with good intentions. They said, let's pay attention to the performance of all student groups, low income and English learners and students by race and ethnicity, not just district averages, so we can identify and close learning gaps and learning opportunities as well. It set big aspirations, but it also had a big flaw. It said students had to pass their state's math and reading tests, all students, everyone, by 2014, or the schools would face penalties, the equivalent of being sent to the office. Not only were those pretty steep stairs, but the measure of a school was just about math and reading tests. That's a pretty narrow way to look at school improvement. So with tremendous pressure on principals and superintendents to increase pass rates in math and English, what happened? Well, it's kind of predictable. Many schools stopped teaching art, history, science, fun subjects that kids cared about, especially Ginny, who knew then she wanted to become a veterinarian and she was interested in science. You may not remember it, but your teachers were under a lot of pressure to raise test scores. When you think back, did you do a lot of drills in the spring? Were your teachers in a foul mood the week before the tests came out? Did you feel like Ginny, caught in a spinning wheel. Well, adults started feeling frustrated too. Jerry Brown, who was then the California Attorney General, really started the rebellion in California against the No Child Left Behind law. He wrote U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan a scorching letter in 2009. This one-size-fits-all approach ignores the vast diversity of the federal system and the creativity inherent in local communities, he wrote. What we have at stake are the impressionable minds of children in America. Is he talking about me? Ginny asked. Well, it took Congress 6 more years to replace that law with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which limits the role of federal government in K-12 education. No Child Left Behind will be remembered as ultimately destructive, though perhaps well-intentioned, by setting the wrong goals with the wrong form of pressuring schools to improve. There was more promising news in 2010. It started nearly a decade of sweeping changes in policy. The first was the adoption of the Common Core standards by nearly every state. I and others thought that they were a big improvement, but it's one thing to decree new standards, another thing to see that they're taught and used. Governor Brown and the legislature didn't earmark any money for training teachers on how to teach the new standards for 4 more years, and a lot of time was lost in between. Ginny, she remembers 2010 as a good year to go to the movies. Also in 2010, Jerry Brown, the force behind the decade's policy changes, was elected governor for the 3rd time. He had served in the 1970s too. Brown was determined to create a new system to fund and improve schools and ignore No Child Left Behind if he had to. And he turned to Mike Kirst as his advisor and appointed him to lead the State Board of Education for the next 8 years. But keep in mind, there still was a recession. The economy doesn't improve just because smart guys get elected. Actually, the worst years in terms of funding were Brown's first term. It got to the point that California had the nation's lowest spending per student when you and Ginny were in elementary school. So what do you remember from those days? Many parents were worried about the state and the future of public schools. Ginny had sad memories from those days, and the same question on everybody's mind. Can it get worse? Things started looking up when you and Ginny were in 3rd grade. Voters passed Proposition 30, which raised income taxes that brought in $6 billion a year. The truth was that Jerry Brown had threatened to cut schools by $6 billion if voters hadn't passed it. And then, in 2013, remember Mike Kirst's idea to change the way the state finances K-12? Well, Jerry Brown persuaded the legislature to do it. In the last couple of days, you've probably been talking about the local control funding formula, how it distributes extra money to low-income kids, English learners, foster and homeless youth. Well, there are 2 things to keep in mind about it. Most states that propose making their funding formulas fairer had to spend years, if not decades, in lawsuits and fighting in court. Jerry Brown was able to persuade the legislature to adopt it for 2 reasons. First, he promised to shift power over decisions from Sacramento to local districts. That's local control. And he impressed upon legislators that there was a moral imperative to do right for the kids who needed extra funding. As he said often, equal treatment for children in unequal situations is not justice. The next big change, also in 2013, California adopted the new science standards that emphasize conceptual knowledge and real-life applications. Ginny liked the next-generation science standards, even if they were slow to reach many classrooms in California. Ginny could actually see herself becoming a veterinarian. There was also a problem. You've got pretty good math and English language arts standards, but up to that point, the only tests you had were on the old standards, and that wouldn't work. So while they were being developed, the state took a break. In 2014, for the first time in 2 decades, there were no spring standardized tests while you were in middle school. My guess is you were about as sad as Ginny and her teachers were. In the last couple of days, you've probably been talking about the Local Control Accountability Plans, or LCAPs, in which districts set priorities on how to spend extra dollars they get for high-priority students. It's an important document, and it's been a work in progress, trying to strike a balance between providing enough information to let parents and students know what's being spent without reading like a computer manual. Ginny tried it in 2014, the first year they appeared, and it made her head spin. Finally, though, Smarter Balance tests replaced the old state tests in the spring of 2015, though Ginny was not exactly impressed. Also in 2015, Congress and President Obama finally reached a deal to replace the No Child Left Behind law. The long and short of it is this. Congress gave states a lot of flexibility to fix low-performing schools with the Every Student Succeeds Act. You don't hear much about it, but it was a big win for Governor Brown and Mike Kearse. For the most part, they could build a state system of improvement without much meddling from Washington, D.C. In November 2016, the tax that Jerry Brown persuaded voters to pass in 2013 was extended well beyond your time in school to 2030. As a result, there's been a lot more money coming into schools since you were in middle school, at least up till last year. Per student spending rose, so California went from last in the nation to, in the latest report, 36th in the nation when adjusted for the high cost of living in California. The funding has gotten to districts as intended under the law, but Ginny's gotten to be a pretty observant student. She asked the right question. Gee, I wonder if all this money was actually being spent on kids as intended. So consider all the pieces. You've got new academic standards, new tests, district priorities as set forth in the LCAP. You're paying attention to multiple measures, not just test scores, like suspension rates and preparation for college and careers. So how do you tell parents and students whether their schools are making progress in all these areas? Well, enter the school dashboard in 2017 using colors to show progress or lack of it. It's innovative, though it wasn't instantly clear to Ginny and a lot of people how to read what was happening. In the fall of 2018, we said farewell to Jerry Brown. After 4 terms as governor, including the previous 8 years, he headed off to his ranch in Colusa County like a sheriff in an old western. But there are clouds on the horizon, like a teacher shortage and questions whether all these changes will make a difference to close disparities in achievement among student groups and lead to success for all students. There are some positive signs, like a big increase in graduation rates, more ethnic studies courses, more AP courses in most districts, and some interesting new career pathways. But there was also a troubling report in 2019 from the state auditor. Her conclusion: in general, we determined that the state's approach to a local control funding formula has not ensured that funding is benefiting students as intended. So here we go, 2020, the bookend to your school years, a strange recession, and a pandemic. 15 months ago, there was an order to close down schools. Little did Ginny know then how long it would be till she'd see her friend in person again. All of you experienced COVID differently. For Ginny, the bad dreams continued through last fall and through the winter. Her interest in school flagged. She overslept. She turned off her video. Finally, in April, she returned to school excited, only to find plexiglass cubicles and Zoom in a room. They call this hybrid? I call it a waste of time, she complained to her parents. But always the optimist, Ginny was in the front of a line to get her Pfizer shot. So here's the thing. COVID created a strange recession. A lot of working parents lost their jobs, and kids have suffered, as many of you know and experience yourself. But the stock market bounced back and soared, creating huge dividends for the wealthy, a flood of tax revenue for the state, and this paradox. There's a critical need for demand for school funding, and there's also record revenues from the state and federal governments to provide it. You can see that reflected on the bar charts on revenues. The result? $40 billion, at least, mainly one-time money spread over a few years to help you and your schools recover, renew, and move forward. There's never been that much money in one time in one state. Its potential is extraordinary. Most of it's going straight to your districts with flexibility to spend it as the districts want. It's your chance to see that you do it right. A lot of us feel for what you have been through during your school years, especially the last 15 months, but Ginny's resilient and she refuses to be a victim of circumstances, and I hope you are too. When she was home with the video off, Ginny was actually deep in thought. She created a California Students' Bill of Rights. Let's take a minute to read it.
Bill of Rights for 2021 through 2022. For me, my sister, Guillermo, and all kids in California. We're entitled to computers and fast internet connections. We're entitled to more A through G courses and exciting career pathways. We're entitled to in-school tutoring to help us catch up on what we missed. We're entitled to after-school programs. We're entitled to more counselors and social workers. We're entitled to inspiring, caring, well-trained teachers. We're entitled to safe and supportive schools where students can thrive. We're entitled to know how $40 billion in new funding will be spent for students. All Guineas deserve a quality, well-funded education. The time is now.
Thanks, Ginny. That was pretty awesome and inspiring. You know, though it's taken a decade to get here, the structure of California's K-12 education is basically sound, but it's still measured in promises, it's incomplete and underfunded, and pieces are missing. I hope you help fill those in. I hope you create your own Student Bill of Rights, find common ground with others, and push hard to make change. As Ginny said, it's your time, so get to work and make a difference. Data visualization specialist Sunny Shi, digital communications editor Andrew Reed, and I produced the Ginny Chronicles. Zahara Bali, a junior at Evergreen Valley High School in San Jose, was the voice of Ginny. For all of your news and information on California education, check out edsource.org. You can subscribe for free to our daily newsletter with links to the latest stories, graphics, and podcasts by clicking the icon at the top of our landing page. You can also join our community network where we solicit the views of our readers. Hundreds of people are part of that network, and you should be too. We need the views of students. Thanks for listening.
John, you put on quite a show. That was just such a phenomenal and just so well researched, so well put together video. I quite honestly don't think I've ever seen a resource that was just that informative and that clear and to the point. So thank you so much. I don't know if you're having trouble turning on your video, but
but I'm listening. Sorry for whatever reason. Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, just thank you so much for taking the time to put together that video. It was honestly, I don't think that there's anything that anyone would have changed about it. It was perfect.
Oh, it was fun doing it, and I'm open to questions.
Awesome. So our first question kind of stems from a little bit about your history. You clearly seem so incredibly passionate about education in California and the history of education. So I'm just kind of curious, where does that stem from?
Well, I've been a reporter for decades, and I was always fascinated in schools. For one thing, it got me out of the office as a good excuse to get into schools, which I found fascinating. And when I moved to San Jose about 20 years ago, I spent a lot of time in East San Jose going around to the high schools and East Side Union High School. And I was noticing back then some of the changes we talked about, and I really wanted to see the impact on students and families. Apologies about the dog, just came home, so.
Not a problem.
Okay.
What are some of your favorite sources for education news? We obviously have a lot of students, and so they might want to, I guess, find other sources to kind of get well informed on.
Yeah, well, for California, there is a site called FICMAT. It's the fiscal management team. It's a state agency. They produce a digest every day on stories. And I also check around with other newspapers and other journals as well.
Awesome. Another question that is kind of coming in right now is, what do you think is the most effective activism to get districts to spend money the way that students truly want them to?
Yeah, I really think, I was serious, this is a critical moment, and it is time to get students involved, either to show up at their school board meetings, to work through their school boards and let them know and organize. I was listening before, and I'm impressed that, I was impressed with Ed100 as the organizing students, but I hope that they can get together and speak with more of one voice, if possible, or multiple voices, because you deserve to be represented, and if you have creative ideas, to talk about them, and don't take no for an example. You know, we can't find the teachers, we can't find the aides. in my discussions with students, there are often creative ideas that that school boards and other teachers and principals need to hear from you about.
Definitely. Another question that's coming in is, what do you think would help the academic system to just improve overall?
Oh, wow. How much time do I have for that? I think that, boy, that's a really, I don't know that there's any single thing, except that I think it's been good that there's been a relaxation of the standardized tests, and so that you can begin to rethink about what's the priority for you. For example, health and welfare, mental health, your health, going back to school, to expand what the things that we actually measure and start to survey students. And that's not the academic, but I think certainly to extend the opportunities of AP courses and things to all schools and all students. So I think begin to measure it more creatively than simply the standardized tests that have become the measure in the past.
I definitely agree. And I think that during this year, at least in my case, I saw that we were getting a lot more surveys about, things like social emotional well-being and things like that. And I think that that's something that's super important for us to kind of transition and take with us after the pandemic. Another question coming in, kind of a hypothetical. If you had $40 billion or the $40 billion, how would you allocate the funding? And what do you think would kind of be the best for effective change?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think would be very useful now, particularly since this 40 billion is a short time, 2 or 3 years primarily, I think a lot of that can be spent on really intensive tutoring in school during the day. So I'd really bringing students up to what they've lost, and also working with them individually in small groups. That will take some creative solutions. I think some states have tried that. I think that's a worthy use of money for starters.
Awesome. And then finally, kind of ending this on an important note, how important is it for students to truly learn about the education system?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's too often viewed as something that's beyond their control, or it's something that's done to them, for them, without listening to them. And without putting a plug, again, we do have a network. I would love to hear more student voices. And I think that we at EdSource can do webinars, and we've often had teachers and other members of the community, not enough students. And so I think that you and listeners can hold me to it. We should do more of that in this year.
A plug is definitely deserved. You heard John, kind of, if you are in need and wanting to learn more about the education system, EdSource is definitely another great option for you. They publish daily articles, and I get a lot of your guys' mailing list to my email every single day, and I make sure to read through it. So thank you so much for first of all coming today and for speaking with us, for assembling that just once again awesome video, and for just being the change maker, and for always kind of staying up to date and keeping all of us up to date with the news and things that are going on in California's education.
Thank you for what I've seen today of the Academy. I've been impressed myself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Welcome.